I remember about 10 years ago trying to address this problem that we're talking about today. I work for a conservation organization, IUCN, and I noticed that we were really having a problem with farmers. But not really with the farmers. It was more of a problem with us. Because I'd worked with farmers in my youth when I was in Southeast Asia for 12 years. And the farmers that I knew were all people who actually cared a lot about nature. And they knew a lot about wildlife, and they knew a lot about biodiversity, but of course they never would use a term like that. And so I tried to bring together the conservation movement and farmers. And I ended up working on a book called Eco-Agriculture, where we really tried to bring it together and show how the two movements can fit very well together. And I think that in fact is beginning to happen. And the meeting that we're having here today is very timely in that regard, because it's showing how the private sector and NGOs and governments are all coming together and recognizing that we really do need to think about biodiversity in terms of how much it contributes to all of the things that we care about. If we think even about every time you go out to the supermarket and buy something, the processed foods that we buy are very complex, and their complexity incredibly draws from biodiversity. The flavors that you get, the companies that are making flavors are getting those flavors from a very wide range of organisms in nature. So if you get something that is lemon flavored, that doesn't mean it actually came from a lemon. It may have come from a persimmon or from something else. And that's why biodiversity is so important, is because it provides us with the ability to use our modern technology and come up with better food for the people, for all of us, and the things that we care about. I'm actually here not for this meeting, but to launch a book that I've just written called The Wealth of Nature, about ecosystem services. So I was very happy, of course, to hear about all the things that are going on with ecosystem services. And also, the last point I would like to make in way of introduction is that I've just come back from Japan. And many of you will know that Japan is the host of the Biodiversity Convention Conference of Parties 10 next year in Nagoya. And the government of Japan has decided that as their real contribution to biodiversity, they're going to push something that they call the Satoyama Initiative. Satoyama in Japanese refers to traditional agriculture. That when you go and visit a Satoyama, you can say, wow, this is a place that really understands about biodiversity. They have rice, of course, down in the lowlands, but then they have a wide range of other crops. They have trees, they have animals, they have religious ceremonies that take place in these Satoyama. And they're trying to push this idea of traditional agriculture. And if we look at traditional agriculture here in Europe, of course you don't call it Satoyama, but every country has traditional agriculture. And I think we'll be hearing about some of it in the next few minutes. And I think that if we can all come together and be looking at these forms of agriculture that are based on biodiversity, then we're going to have a much more productive way of moving ahead. So with those few words of introduction, I'd like to first call on Christian Verschuren, who's going to talk to us about a voluntary commitment to protect biodiversity and high conservation values in forests. This is beverage cartons. Yeah, okay. That ought to be good. I'd like to eat one of those. Go ahead, Christian.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I knew I was going to be in for an interesting introduction with you. So, but basically, I wanted to indeed, tell you a little bit more about our voluntary commitment and why, how it deals with biodiversity. So, I'm going to try to rush you through the 15 slides I have here in the 10 minutes that we have, and basically, this is the OR Association. We're representing beverage carton manufacturers and also their European paperboard producers. So it's a relatively small organization, but a sector, basically with all those companies representing 95% of those beverage carton that you know and you use when you buy your milk and your juice and soups in the supermarkets. And now you may wonder actually, what cartons actually got to do with biodiversity? Well, the answer is actually fairly simple, and that is that basically our story starts in the forest. As basically beverage cartons are made of 75% paperboard that is in itself made from virgin wood fiber, and that therefore it's quite essential for the industry that we secure a sustainable source of the raw material, not only for the economic livelihood of the business, but also because it's quite important from a point of view of maintaining those as a source and as the source of the habitat for key species, and therefore that there are practices and policies responsible for the conservation and the responsible management of those resources. I mean, that's one of the primary reasons looking from the inside out, but also looking from the outside in a way, increasingly. And I think Jeff alluded to the element of flavors, but there is increasing demands from the customers, and as you see, I think from the consumers down there, to increasing demands and pressure for knowing where their material comes from. And of course, we all know that from food. People want to know where their food comes from, whether it is local, how it's been produced. And increasingly also people are demanding that also from their packaging. And that's why as a result of that you see some responses, and although you see some bugs here with the images, but I think why increasingly people have and companies have been responding with producing products in relation to that with FSC certified labels in relation to that. And that goes back to what is the core of the commitment that the industry engaged in the three major companies here. And you see here the CEOs with one of Véronique's Mathieu colleague, Lena Eck, who committed to a voluntary commitment which is global in itself, and which also has been recognized by the European Commission and by stakeholders. And that commitment is as follows, is that by 2015, there will be 100% chain of custody of all the paper mills. And that chain of custody will be extended to beverage carton manufacturers by the year 2018. And then on top of that, this will be third-party verified. And so basically, in order to, what's quite essential here is that you have a value chain that is watertight, and that starts, of course, at the level of the forestry with forest management or controlled wood. And this is the core of our commitment here, is that in the paper mill and beverage carton manufacturing plant, there is a system of chain of custody that is being certified and independently verified. So the commitment was made in 2007, and we reported the first result of that first baseline year at the very beginning of this year, and more recently, a couple of weeks ago, reported the progress in 2008. And here you can see basically the two ways that we are measuring it. One is by the percentage of the fiber that is being purchased by beverage carton manufacturers from paper mills, and what percentage is either certified or so-called controlled wood. And I'll come to that, those words in a minute, because those are quite important, because there are a number of criteria defined that relate to biodiversity. So considerable progress already, and on track for achieving the 100% target by 2015, and a similar as well, although be somewhat slower progress, for the certification of the operating companies and beverage carton manufacturing companies at the European level. Now, the question is, of course, what is the link between this voluntary commitment and biodiversity? As I mentioned, if you remember in the first diagram, the link is very much that to have sourcing that is certified, that is independently verified, and that comes from either a certification on well-managed forest from the FSC as a key example, PEFC being another one, or any other equivalent system that has clear criteria in terms of how your forest is being managed, or an alternative source is being called, because the problem is to find enough forests that have enough certification and a higher percentage of certification of area. And as a result of that, FSC created something that we also had defined in terms of criteria as controlled wood, which basically respect a certain number of criteria. One of which is that wood would not be purchased that comes from forest with high conservation value. Now, what is high conservation values? That is defined by the High Conservation Value Network, and they have 6 set of criteria, of which 3 related to biodiversity and this ecosystem. And through that particular process, you then have the link with respect and contribution to biodiversity by being in compliance with the criteria for this voluntary commitment. And the other important issue as well is that the beverage cartons in Europe originate mostly from Sweden. By and large, the raw material comes from, and again, there seems to be something missing there in the map, and I think that's probably the incompatibility between 2 versions of PowerPoint. But basically what you see is the message is the northern area of Sweden and Finland, where most of the wood fiber comes from for beverage cartons manufactured in Europe. And there, what you can see is the trends and the experience that Sweden has had in terms of forest management for over 100 years. Sweden, and the same applies for Finland, and the same applies by and large to Europe at large. Forest, the incremental growth of forest has been positive. So in other words, there's been more growth of forest than there has been harvesting of forest, and that's been a deliberate decision that's been made by those countries because their livelihood of their countries depend on these key resources. So as you see here, of the last, and this shows the last sort of 100 years, a growth and a trend for the standing volume of forest. But not only that, and this relates somewhat to the session we had on agriculture. There is an important part of that is also being reserved for nature conservation, not unlike some of the initiatives you've heard from the previous speakers on agriculture. First of all, one that's mandated by law, in terms of an area of the forest that is reserved for non-productive area. But in addition to that, thanks to voluntary initiatives and voluntarily, set aside by the industry, forests that are maintained there for conservation. And so, as a result of that, and I'd like to, highlight, I think, the industry's opportunity there, that because we have semi-natural forests dominate basically 87% of the cover, there's a major, they retain their natural characteristics, including biodiversity, and therefore there lies a major opportunity to manage forest and harvest practices, to make an impact on those. And I'd like to just, highlight, and I'll flip through the couple of slides, but I have a couple of copies and highlight a book that's been, a report that's been done by CEPI, the Organization for Paper and Pulp Industry in Europe, have done together with the European Environmental Agency, Eurocide, and DG Environment on promoting biodiversity and sharing best practices in the areas of forest and forest procurements. And there is a role for basically everyone. You can see all types of biodiversity tools, and also the people that are involved in the value chain in that particular area. Again, those examples are there, as you can see, or at least partly what you can see, in terms of the various tools. But I have, again, if you come with me, and I have about 10 copies of those here with me that I'd be like to share with you, or otherwise give me your card, and if we don't have any more, we'll be able to send you a copy of that. And this is, basically also, this is, what I've talked about is Europe. But of course, biodiversity is a global challenge, and we have to look, beyond Europe. And therefore, I think it's quite important that we also support the EU legislation, and ACE does support the EU legislation to combat illegal logging. There is a current piece of legislation being discussed at the Council level. We'll come back to the Parliament in the beginning of 2010 in the second reading for a due diligence regulation to combat illegal logging. And our companies also work with suppliers outside of Europe for the global market. Because if you remember, I mean, our commitment is a global one. And, basically, I want to give you one example of our company, Tetra Pak, which also for supplying their market outside of Europe, uses a lot of wood fiber coming from a major paper pulp company in Brazil called Klabin. And this is the kind of mosaic type of forest structure where they have a combination of natural forest, left for conservation, together with plantation in order to achieve this particular goal of biodiversity. So with that, I think within the time, I want to thank you for your attention and wanted to continue to work with you, particularly in this next year of biodiversity.
Okay, thanks, Christian. I think one of the important points that I take away from this is that Christian was talking about a voluntary commitment, but he also mentioned the regulatory framework that is being developed. And so maybe it really is a matter of not one or the other, but we need both. We need a strong regulatory framework and then also a voluntary implementation that goes beyond what the regulatory framework calls for. Okay, let's go on next to the Wildlife Estates Initiative by Geva Blackett. Jiva, I'm so sorry, I didn't get to meet you before we started. Okay. Jiva.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak here today. My name is Jiva Blackett. I live in Scotland in the Cairngorms National Park, where my husband manages a large hunting estate. I am a board member of the National Park, although I do not appear in that capacity today. This picture shows the view from my kitchen window. How lucky am I? How to balance hunting and civilian activities, a question that faces us all in the 21st century in Europe. On the one hand, we have estates performing the vital role of managing Europe's biodiversity, and on the other, we have the socio-economic needs of our communities. This slide shows how this important initiative was born. Between 2005 and 2008, 12 workshops were held in different member states, and little by little, the initial vision developed, and many other organisations and individuals became involved. So what is this project, and how does it benefit the citizens of Europe? I will first outline the procedure and then move on to a specific example. The Charter is made up of 10 commitments, and this is the first step towards being awarded the label. To move on to the second level, which is attaining the label, the Charter must be signed. Thereafter, at the second level, there is a degree of subsidiarity, as no two member states are the same. So what stage are we at now? Well, we're approaching the end of the pilot. Application forms have been finalised for 4 regions, and there's still work to be done on 2. We have a booklet describing the project. We have a website, and we currently hold 1 working and 1 plenary session every year in different member states. To give you an example of how valuable this is, earlier this year, the working group was held in Finland, and I have passed on some good ideas on managing capercaillie populations that I picked up from an expert on that trip. The more examples of best practice and management techniques that can be exchanged in this way, the better for Europe's biodiversity. In the foreword to the initiative's booklet, Commissioner Dimas said, "I very much welcome independent initiatives such as ELO's Wildlife Estates Initiative, which promote such synergies between conservation and sustainable use, and I hope that many wildlife and hunting estates will join the initiative." The Commission recognises that to a large extent the future of biodiversity lies in the hands of land managers and hunters across Europe, as it is in their interest to protect the habitats and species diversity of the territories they manage. I'm neither a hunter nor a land manager, but I am a citizen of Europe, and a mother. And so I too hope that estate owners will aspire to this label, which can only benefit the generations of Europeans yet to come. The second part of my presentation concentrates on one estate in Scotland, which has recently signed up to the Charter and is now working towards the label. But first, a few facts and figures to set the scene. Scottish landscapes are renowned for their beauty, and with only 2% of the landmass classed as urban, Scotland consists largely of countryside. According to government statistics published in 2007, over 60% of the population live in the Central Belt, leaving large parts of the country with only a scattered human presence. For example, the population density in the Highlands and Islands is just 9.5 per kilometre squared, which is less than a tenth of the EU 27 average. We have many very remote communities. Diversity of terrestrial and marine habitats supports some 90,000 species of animal, plants and microbes, including several which are under threat both nationally and/or internationally. Hunting estates account for 43% of privately owned land, which is the largest concentration of land dedicated to hunting in Europe. Half the country is owned by 608 owners, and one such holding is Invercould Estate, which is managed by my husband. Invercould Estate, which neighbours the Royal Estate of Balmoral, is in the heart of the Cairngorms National Park. Activities include grouse shooting, red deer stalking, salmon fishing, forestry, and a small amount of stock farming. There is also a ski area, a golf course, and a caravan park on the estate, all of which are rented to local people who run these enterprises as businesses in an area where every single job is reliant on the visitor. A castle is leased free of charge to the local community. These designations show precisely how rich in biodiversity the territory is. From the magnificent golden eagle, right through salmon, red deer, red grouse and their endangered heather habitat, right through to the rare burnet moth, Invercould has much to be proud of, which is why this progressive estate has taken the lead in the UK and signed up to the Wildlife Estates Initiative. So how does Invercould fulfil the generic requirements of the Wildlife Estates Initiative? The estate is both Atlantic and boreal in character. The estate is rich in biodiversity, from the grouse moor through the ancient Caledonian pine forests to the upper reaches of one of Scotland's most renowned salmon rivers, the River Dee. The estate is home to some of Scotland's most iconic landscapes and species. This slide shows exactly why the management of grouse, for example, is so important for Scotland and indeed the EU's biodiversity. It is well worth mentioning here that heather moorland is rarer than rainforest, and 75% of the world's heather is found in northern Britain. Management for grouse hunting ensures this iconic habitat is sustained for today's rural communities and for tomorrow's, to say nothing of the honeybees. I would just like to briefly mention the invaluable role played by the estate in controlling invasive species. I have red squirrels in my garden. 20 years ago, the grey squirrel was 60 miles away. It is now 40. We're working with the government to push back the invasion. In the Scottish borders, gamekeepers have been holding the grey at bay for many years. Mink are controlled at virtually no cost to the taxpayer, and similarly, the ruddy duck is controlled in other parts of the country. Detailed counts of red deer are performed. Grouse are counted before the hunting season begins to ensure a sustainable harvest. No grouse, no hunting. Salmon catches are recorded. Stakeholders such as the RSPB count ring-ouzel populations, and of course management plans for the Natura 2000 sites exist. You will see that the estate operates at a loss, And this deficit is covered by rich hunters who ensure that the management can continue despite a lack of quarry. The estate is home to one of Scotland's most haunted castles, and folklore abounds in the area. So how does all this hunting management benefit the local community? It is too far to commute to Aberdeen, 95 kilometres away. The local industry is tourism. Why do tourists come here? Because it's beautiful. Why is it beautiful? Because the area is managed for grouse, deer, forestry and fishing. The estate's activities keep a remote rural community alive. The estate has interpretation points at various sites for the annual 125,000 plus visitors a year, be they walkers, mountain bikers, wildlife watchers or hunting participants. But it is essential that the children passing through the local school gates every year continue to benefit from the work done with the estate in helping them to understand what makes this territory so special, and to encourage them to help look after it so that their children and grandchildren can wonder at the beauty too. How right the late King was. I hope I have shown how estates contribute to the world we live in, how their good management is vital to the future, and how the Wildlife Estates Initiative is the ideal way for stakeholders to work together and promote what is best about our countryside. I commend the initiative to you and ask you to please support it.
From wildlife to forestry, the Cork example from, presumably this is from Portugal, from João Gomes Ferreira.
Thank you.
Mediterranean soils. Thousands of years ago.
That's not the beginning.
But you were a ventriloquist.
Yeah. No. That's it. Thank you. Portuguese technology, you know how it works. So first, let me start to congratulate MEPs Veronique Mathieu and Joseph Daul, and also all the biodiversity European foundations for this initiative where the future of biodiversity preservation is being discussed. Humans, as all we know, are part of the web of life, and with all other species, humans should never forget that destroying biodiversity will destroy themselves in a not very long-term period. Copenhagen conference will start in 1 week, and all of us wish that it can bring coordinated and strong that can help and stop the destruction of our planet. I'm sure that in the end of the day, the conclusions of our discussion can be a good start document to some directives and politics to be discussed in Copenhagen, more specifically about ways to stop biodiversity loss all over the world. We are living, like Alvin Toffler referred, the very beginning of what he called the Green Revolution, and no steps back can be done in order to make this revolution a real revolution and something positive to our world. Now focusing on the subject that brought me here, I'm the Secretary General of the Cork European Confederation that represents stakeholders from the forest to the bottle. Our confederation has members, associated members from Portugal, Spain, Italy, France and Germany, as well as observer members from South Africa, Algeria, Morocco, United States, and we are now considering to admit China and Australia. So you can see that Cork is present in the most part of the world. I will skip some figures, but just to remember that we represent around 1,000 companies in Europe, and around 100,000 jobs, direct and indirect, in the less favored areas in Europe. Cork oaks extend for an area of almost 2.2 million hectares, concentrated mainly in the Mediterranean basin, and that it's the south of Europe and north of Africa. Cork oaks are never cutted, they are harvested, so what we use to produce cork stoppers and other materials is the bark from the cork oak tree, and this regular extraction of the cork is a fundamental contribution for environmental, economic and social sustainability of the rural areas of the Mediterranean region. Also, and very important, these well-managed forests are, with human presence, of course, are the best protection against forest fires, which have been a real and significant disaster over the last years. Well, nowadays, all of you know, and it's very common to hear in news and everywhere, that a new ecological awareness is driven by a green wave. Everyone is claiming for a more sustainable world, where our future generations can have a better life. Although there are many critical voices that say this is almost impossible, and if we want to act in the triple bottom line, we cannot. We have to choose from economic, environmental, or economical development. That's not true, and cork is the product or the material that can prove that it's not an utopia at all. As cork is the montado that are, it's the name for the cork oak forests, support one of the highest levels of biodiversity among forest habitats, and they are listed in the European Commission Habitats Directive that you can see, the habitats 63310 and 9330. Some species like the Iberian lynx that it's one of the most endangered species. It's the most endangered big cat in the world, lives in the cork oak forests, as well as many other species like the Iberian imperial eagle, the Barbary deer, the black vulture, the black stork, and large numbers of wintering birds from Northern Europe, including the entire European population of common cranes and others, and the rich diversity of fauna. The montados are present, and this ecosystem of the Mediterranean basin was considered by the Conservation International as one of the hottest biodiversity hotspots in the world. We have also spoke today, and we have listened a lot about what we call the externalities and the ecosystem services that today don't have a market value, but that we hope in the near future they can be considered as a market value externality. Let me remember that last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, in the TIB report that was presented in the first panel, Commissioner Dimas said that the failure to protect nature is often a consequence of our failure to understand its value. So it's a key, it's very important to retain this and to evaluate the ecosystem service. I would like now to invite you to see a small part of the wonderful BBC documentary that resumes in a few minutes, in 2 or 3 minutes, what I've been saying, and it would be much easier for you to understand the wonderful of the cork oak region.
Ago, people learn. A magnificent 200-year-old cork oak, able to thrive on the poorest Mediterranean soils. Thousands of years ago, people learnt to harvest their spongy bark for a uniquely versatile material, cork. They also began to graze the land between the trees and to grow a few other crops. Forests of these cork oaks survive to this day in a few parts of Europe, and with them an astonishing variety of plant and animal life. Cork woodland is especially rich in bird life, with more than 100 different species breeding here in southern Portugal. They include some of Europe's rarest birds, which still find sanctuary amongst these remarkable trees. The bark of the cork oaks is stripped away every 9 years. It's sold for many different uses, from floor tiles to fishing floats. But the greatest revenue comes from the billions of stoppers we use each year to close our wine and champagne bottles. It's because of the high value of cork bark that this ancient landscape, with its rural culture and its wildlife, have been protected until today. But its future is by no means certain. If metal screw caps and plastic were to completely replace natural cork to stop our wine bottles, then a drastic change could be on the way, because landowners would have to replace their oak woodlands with other, more conventional crops. So what is it about these forests that make them so valuable to both people and wildlife? The Alentejo region of southern Portugal stretches from Lisbon in the west to the hills of the Spanish border in the east. It's about 10,000 square miles, or the size of Wales, and is the world's most important cork-growing area. These woodlands of evergreen cork oaks and their close relative, the holm oak, are known in Portugal as montado. Although the montado is so good for wildlife, it's by no means a wilderness, but rather a natural ecosystem of woodland and pasture, which has been sympathetically adapted for farming in this sustainable way for more than 1,000 years.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we have to continue. And unfortunately, not all of these are good news, because cork, this sustainable activity is really in danger. I have only a few minutes. Cork stoppers production represents 70% of the total income value of our activity. So they represent really an important role in the cork industry. You are familiar with all the different type of corks, from champagne to table wines, from bar tops to one-piece cork. So all of these are very familiar on your houses. The problem is that many of you have been misguided because of the petrol derivative closures that imitate cork, not only in the visual aspect, but even they appropriated our name. And imagine the total impact of the 19 billion bottles opened every year if all the corks will move from natural to a plastic product. Fortunately, this is not happening. I want to focus that. We are still the leaders in the world, and it's not good to have an European product that leads the world in these matters. But imagine if even you, that are people with environmental conscience very, very present in your minds, have done this in an involuntary way many times, what the other people do. And we have seen that one of the problems about these issues is that the consumers are not aware of the ecosystem and of biodiversity services. Cork applications, of course, they go from design materials, from fashion, for flooring, tiles, etc. So many times you see them, but you don't even notice that you are talking about a cork product. Just to finish and to let you to see the rest 2 minutes of the movie, I want to show you a very nice picture who shows that the cork oak forests are really the last barrier between the Sahara Desert and the south of Europe. This is a picture from Tunisia, and you can see that the last barrier that combat the desertification are the cork oak trees, really significant. So by choosing a natural cork, what you can do is preserve a rural way of life where approximately 100,000 people work and depend. And before finishing, again, I want to ask you that every time that you celebrate with your family and friends and you open a champagne or a natural or a wine bottle, I hope that this simple act brings to your mind the positive contribution that you are doing to our planet and to our world. Now, I'll ask 2 minutes to see the.
Yeah, we don't have 2 minutes.
No, so I will finish my presentation by saying that it's still worthless to plant cork oak trees, and whenever you drink a bottle of wine, choose natural cork because it's a natural choice and it's the sustainable choice. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that. To me, the real key point wasn't the advertisement about, I always prefer real cork, but how much wildlife is actually conserved in the cork forests of threatened species. So it really demonstrates that agriculture and wildlife conservation can go hand in hand. Now the last speaker is Bart Vercouter, I hope I got that more or less right, who's going to talk to us about Natura 2000 from a threat to an opportunity. Please.
Yes, thank you. I also thanks to the organization and ILO to give me an opportunity to talk to you about the items we are coping with daily. I think the last one and also a bit an exception because I will tell a story about the extraction industry, which always have one loser, and it's the agriculture, because they take agricultural lands often in to extract their granulates or limestone. But nevertheless, I think it's a triple win situation. You win raw materials to build buildings and to make roads on. The model we present today, you create also nature, and not only nature but high level nature. So you create really a backbone in for this instance, biodiversity network, or the examples I show, Natura 2000 as let's say, an imperative on European level on Natura biodiversity. And by doing that, you, I think, can also preserve further claims on agricultural land to also adopt over there biodiversity on more stringent ways. The other item of my presentation I became aware of today is that my presentation is very technical, so I will skip a lot so we finish fast our day, or we can discuss a bit more. I have two examples with me. The first is an quarry what was surrounded by Natura 2000 area, and so which can generate a lot of pressure on that area, and we made a solution, or we designed the solution to have really win-win situation for both areas, the quarry and Natura 2000. And the other was just a complaint that the Natura 2000 area was too small. So really the quarry industry, the extraction industry, had a plea for a larger Natura 2000 area. The first one is a limestone quarry in the south of Belgium, where you have, this is an aerial pic, you see very clearly the quarry, the purple area, which is surrounded by the Natura 2000 area, which had a missing link between two major areas, and we constructed a buffer for the instant and also the future developments, and not only just a buffer, but also a real contribution to Natura 2000 habitats. This is a bit of visualization, but it's not very clear. This is a bit the concept we did. The left figure is a landscape design, which is, let's say, a formally adopted method to make buffer zones and large storage of materials that were not sellable on the market. So sludge and all other aspects. We designed the right feature. So in fact, we inverted the procedure. We put rocks and more limestone-rich sediments on top of the hill. So we developed really a basis for the development of limestone grasslands, which are Natura 2000 habitats. We did a mimicry of natural habitats. Left, you see really in the nature reserve in the Natura 2000 area a picture of how the actual situation is developing, or the natural situation is present. And right, you see some images of the design we did. So different layers, different elements that were available from the quarry. We used rocks, fine elements. And this is a bit you see important for this as element of Natura 2000, of habitat of Natura 2000 is the hill slope. It's very exposed to the south, it's dry. So we developed different hill slopes which were exposed to the south, which had a different angle in the slopes. We created a high diversity of different starting situations to develop chalk grasslands. And this is a bit, this was an existing one, which was formerly constructed on the landscape design. So a lot of fine materials were on top of the hill, but we inverted it in a rocky one. And this is just the first year. This is the second year of development in the direction of a real Natura 2000 habitat and a real connection between the two nature reserves. We do a lot of experiments the RSPB told us that on the level of agriculture and nature, there's a lot of knowledge at this moment available to adopt it. For quarries, it's not really always the present. So we develop at this moment an evaluation scheme, which treatment you should have to develop as fast as possible new chalk grasslands, different types of substrates. If it's important to add organic matter, we also put seeds on it, we put hay on it. Some evaluation, in general, it goes very good. You don't have to put seed on it, you rather put hay on it. The last one, the second one, is a gravel situation where you see an aerial picture of the situation. In blue, it's just the little tiny island, let's say, that is in a special area of conservation. This is another picture, and so the issue was the gravel industry wanted to restore a large area of not real nature area in the upper lake by putting new land, real land, not on the water, on shallow water or something, real land in the lake. By also a bit gaining new gravel, and then we developed a plan which connected, which made more robust. You see the green elements growing between two elements of the Natura 2000 network, and also in the site itself, new habitats for species. And this is a bit, at this moment, the plan that is developed. We created shallow water, we created wetlands, we created new alluvial forests. So really the whole complex of whole diversity of an alluvial ecosystem. But the major problem with this one is you see the red line, which is the former, the purple, the former of the actual limit of the special area of conservation. And we at this moment are arguing so with the extraction industry to enlarge it to the blue line. And the reason why is that for safety of inundation, you should have this connection between the river, it's along the river Meuse, between the Meuse and the former lakes, to have a safe pass-through by high floods. Voilà, that was my story about biodiversity.
Okay, so I think what we've heard this afternoon is a tremendous diversity of types of presentations, but all of them actually came back to the same story, and that is that biodiversity is compatible with a whole wide range of other activities when they're done the right way. And what we've heard is 4 examples of it being done the right way. The challenge is going to be trying to find ways of encouraging others to learn from this and to do it the right way. And this is where perhaps regulations, peer pressure, other activities may be able to push these kinds of ideas much more widely across the European landscape. We'd love to have some more questions, but we've really run out of time because there are some other things that have to happen. There's going to be a Countdown 2010 ambassador declaration, and I'm actually a new Countdown 2010 ambassador, and I have to go, as my first responsibility, I have to go launch a new book that I just wrote about, I told you, is called The Wealth of Nature, about ecosystem services. So I have to very rudely get up and leave, but before I do that, I want to thank João for showing the BBC program, and I'm sorry I had to cut off the last bit. But BBC, I hope you will all watch it every chance you get. Their nature stuff is just great. And so I'd like to thank all of the speakers and turn over the rest of it to our real chair. And thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jeff.